The Jordan Show on YouTube.
So, you've been looking into the history of tech.
Yeah.
Specifically the people behind Intel, right?
Right.
I mean, we're talking about a company that's like synonymous with microchips and processors, but it's the human story behind Intel that I find really fascinating.
Absolutely.
Are you ready to kind of uncover the personalities and the philosophies of the three figures who shaped not just like a company, but like an entire industry?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even how you and I interact with technology today?
Yeah, definitely. I think, these weren't just names on a patent. They represent like a whole shift in how we think about technology.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1968. Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore are at Fairchild Semiconductor. Pretty big deal in the tech world at the time, but they're frustrated.
Uh-huh.
The company's bureaucracy is stifling their creativity.
Yeah, classic tale, right? That tension between the established companies and the drive to innovate.
Yeah, exactly. So they make a bold move, they quit, and launch their own company, Intel, short for Integrated Electronics, in Mountain View, California. And their first hire, Andy Grove,
Wow.
Hungarian-born engineer. He's known for his brilliance and this relentless drive.
That's incredible. Can you imagine like the energy in that room with those three minds coming together?
Oh, yeah.
It's the perfect startup recipe, right? You've got Noyce, the visionary, Moore, the scientific genius, and then you have Grove, the guy who just gets things done.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like how many successful startups today still follow that same pattern.
Uh-huh.
A team with very diverse skills, but each member is vital to the mission.
Speaking of mission, these guys weren't just making gadgets.
Right.
They were chasing innovation at a fundamental level.
All right.
Let's talk about Robert Noyce, often called the mayor of Silicon Valley.
Uh-huh.
He was kind of the heart and soul of Intel. But even before Intel, he co-invented the integrated circuit, which is, huge GE deal.
It's not just huge, it's foundational. Like the integrated circuit miniaturized electronics in a way that enabled modern computing as we know it. Like it's the seed that grew into everything from smartphones to the internet.
Whoa, okay, mind blown. And, it's amazing how Noyce's influence extended beyond the tech itself.
Yeah.
He mentored countless others in Silicon Valley. I mean, even Steve Jobs was inspired by him. There's this anecdote about Jobs just admiring Noyce's focus on collaboration, pushing boundaries.
Yeah, that speaks to the kind of leadership that transcends a single company. It's about shaping an entire culture of innovation. Now on to Gordon Moore.
Okay.
And when we talk about Moore, we have to talk about Moore's Law. I mean, it's practically legendary. But, what are the real-world implications of this prediction?
Well, in the simplest terms, he predicted that the number of transistors on a microchip would double roughly every 2 years. It sounds so simple.
Yeah.
But this became like this guiding principle for the entire semiconductor industry.
Think about that for a second. One prediction that fueled decades of progress, pushing Intel and its competitors to constantly innovate.
Wow.
That's why your phone today is more powerful than room-sized computers from back then, all while constantly shrinking in size and cost. We're living in a world shaped by Moore's vision.
Yeah.
But constantly doubling transistors on a chip that must have presented some incredible challenges.
Well, that brings us to Andy Grove.
Okay.
He's the one who steered Intel through all those challenges. He was known for his, tough love leadership.
Right.
And his philosophy, only the paranoid survive. It sounds intense, but it's fascinating how that mindset really shaped Intel's approach to risk and competition.
Yeah. Grove's life experiences definitely played a role. Imagine surviving Nazi-occupied Hungary and then escaping during the Hungarian Revolution. I mean, that kind of resilience shapes you.
Yeah, talk about pressure.
Exactly.
And under Grove's leadership, Intel made a very risky but pivotal decision, shifting from memory chips to microprocessors.
So imagine Intel in those early days. It's a small, ambitious startup facing intense competition, especially from companies like AMD. And Moore's Law is just breathing down their necks. How did they break through?
Well, their breakout success came with the Intel 4004, the world's first commercial microprocessor, launched in 1971.
1971. Wow. Tell me more about this.
Okay.
What was so special about it?
Well, the 4004 was a game changer, right?
Yeah.
It revolutionized computing by putting the power of a computer onto a single chip.
Wow.
This paved the way for personal computers, automation, the digital world we live in. And it all goes back to that dynamic trio.
Yeah.
Noyce's vision, Moore's scientific insight, and Grove's ability to execute under immense pressure.
Right.
Together, they created something truly remarkable.
Amazing.
So we got this tiny chip, this 4004, that basically kickstarted the PC revolution. It's incredible how far we've come since then.
It really highlights how innovation often builds on itself. The 4004 wasn't the end, it was just the beginning.
Right.
Intel kept pushing the boundaries throughout the 70s and 80s, driven by that relentless pursuit of Moore's Law.
And I imagine that wasn't always easy. You've got Moore's Law pushing for smaller and smaller transistors. But at the same time, you're dealing with the limitations of silicon itself.
Exactly. It's like this constant balancing act. As transistors get smaller, you run into issues like heat dissipation and quantum effects. It's like trying to fit an ocean into a teacup. Eventually, the laws of physics start to push back.
Yeah, so how do they continue innovating? I mean, they couldn't just rely on shrinking transistors forever, right?
Right. They had to find other ways to improve performance.
Yeah. So what did those innovations look like?
Well, they explored new materials with better conductivity, experimented with chip architectures to optimize data flow, and even pioneered new manufacturing techniques. It was a multi-pronged approach to squeezing every bit of performance out of those silicon chips.
And while all this was happening, they were also facing some pretty fierce competition.
Oh, absolutely. Companies like AMD were constantly nipping at their heels. It was like an arms race, each company trying to outdo the other with faster, more efficient processors.
And it wasn't just about the hardware, was it? Didn't Intel also play a role in shaping the software landscape?
Absolutely. They realized early on that the success of their processors depended on having a robust software ecosystem.
Yeah.
They worked closely with software developers, creating tools and platforms that could take full advantage of their hardware's capabilities. It was a brilliant strategy, really.
So they weren't just selling chips, they were building an entire ecosystem around them.
Precisely. And they also understood the importance of marketing. Remember their Intel Inside campaign?
Oh yeah, those stickers were everywhere.
That campaign was genius. They managed to brand a component that most people didn't even understand. They made the invisible visible. And in doing so, they cemented their position as the leading name in processors.
It's fascinating how they went from the small startup in Mountain View to this global powerhouse that basically shaped the way we interact with technology. But all this talk about Moore's Law and the limits of silicon makes me wonder, is there an end in sight?
Well, the industry is definitely reaching a point where simply shrinking transistors is becoming unsustainable. But remember, Intel is a company built on innovation. They're not just going to sit back and wait for Moore's Law to fizzle out.
So what are they doing to prepare for the future of computing?
They're heavily investing in research into new computing paradigms, including quantum computing, which has the potential to revolutionize the field. Imagine solving problems that are impossible for even the most powerful traditional computers.
It's mind-blowing to think about the possibilities. But tell me more about quantum computing. How does it even work?
It's a complex topic, but in a nutshell, quantum computers leverage the principles of quantum mechanics to perform calculations in ways that are fundamentally different from traditional computers. Instead of bits, which can be either 0 or 1, quantum computers use qubits, which can be in a superposition of both states simultaneously. This allows them to perform certain types of calculations exponentially faster.
So instead of just shrinking transistors, they're exploring completely new ways of computing.
Exactly. And it's not just quantum computing. They're also looking at other areas like neuromorphic computing, which mimics the structure of the human brain. The future of computing is going to be about finding new ways to process information, and Intel is at the forefront of that exploration.
It's amazing how they continue to embrace this spirit of innovation, even after achieving so much success. It's like it's ingrained in their company culture.
And that goes back to the founders. Noyce, Moore, and Grove created a culture that thrives on challenges and embraces change. That's what's allowed them to stay ahead of the curve for so long. But there's another, perhaps less glamorous side to the pursuit of Moore's Law.
What do you mean?
Well, the constant push for faster, cheaper, more powerful chips has also had some negative consequences. Electronic waste, for example, is a growing problem.
That's a good point. All those old computers and smartphones have to go somewhere, and it's not always pretty.
Exactly. And the manufacturing process for these chips is also incredibly resource intensive. So as we look to the future, we need to consider not just the benefits of these technological advancements, but also the environmental and social costs.
It's a complex issue, for sure. But back to Intel, what about those challenges from competitors like AMD? How are they navigating that landscape?
Well, the competition in the semiconductor industry is fiercer than ever. AMD has made significant strides in recent years, particularly in the CPU market. They've been able to offer competitive performance at more attractive prices.
So how has Intel responded?
They've had to adapt and innovate. They've invested heavily in new manufacturing processes to improve their chip density and performance. They've also expanded into new markets, such as artificial intelligence and data centers, where AMD is also a major player.
It sounds like they're not giving up the fight easily.
Absolutely not. They're still the biggest player in the industry, but they can't afford to rest on their laurels. They need to continue to push the boundaries of technology and find new ways to stay ahead of the curve. And speaking of pushing boundaries, let's circle back to the idea of Moore's Law reaching its limits.
We were just talking about Moore's Law maybe hitting a wall.
Yeah,
Does that mean like the era of rapid technological advancement is over?
that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some experts believe we're approaching the limits of what's physically possible with silicon-based transistors, but, I wouldn't count the industry out just yet.
So what are the alternatives? We talked about quantum computing a bit earlier.
Right.
Is that the solution?
Quantum computing is definitely one of the most promising avenues, but it's still in its early stages.
Yeah.
Building stable and scalable quantum computers is incredibly challenging. It's like trying to build a house of cards in a hurricane.
Okay, so maybe not a quick fix. What else is on the horizon?
Well, there's a lot of exciting research into new materials like graphene
Uh-huh.
that could potentially replace silicon.
Okay.
Imagine processors that are even smaller, faster, and more energy efficient.
Wow.
And then there are also new architectural approaches like 3D chip stacking
Right.
that can increase performance without relying solely on shrinking transistors.
So even if like traditional transistors hit a limit,
Right.
there are other ways to keep pushing forward.
Exactly.
It sounds like the spirit of innovation that drove Intel's founders
Yeah,
is still alive and well in the industry.
absolutely. That drive to constantly improve and reinvent is what's fueled the incredible progress we've seen in computing. And it's what will continue to drive us forward, even as we face new challenges. But let's bring it back to Intel specifically. They've been at the forefront of this technological revolution for decades. What's their role in this rapidly changing landscape?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, they're obviously facing increased competition,
Right.
and they're dealing with the same physical limitations as everyone else.
Yeah.
How are they adapting?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, they're investing heavily in quantum computing research. They're also exploring new materials and manufacturing processes, and they're expanding into new markets like AI and data centers, where the demand for computing power is just exploding.
So they're not just sitting back and waiting for the future to happen.
Nope.
They're actively shaping it.
Exactly. They're still one of the biggest players in the game, and they have a lot of resources and expertise to bring to bear. But it's going to be an interesting ride.
Yeah.
The landscape of computing is shifting beneath our feet, and only time will tell who the winners and losers will be.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener for me. It's amazing to think back to those early days of Intel with Noyce, Moore, and Grove, and to see how their vision has shaped the world we live in today.
It really underscores the power of human ingenuity. And as we look to the future, with all its challenges and uncertainties, one thing is for sure. The spirit of innovation that drove those pioneers is still alive and kicking.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Intel, what's the big takeaway for our listener?
I think it's a story of relentless innovation, adaptability, and the enduring power of human curiosity. Intel's journey is a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, there's always a way forward if we're willing to think outside the box and push the boundaries of what's possible.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this fascinating journey.
My pleasure. Until next time.